the proper way is just to reach out. You can always get our information on our website. My phone number's on there, email's on there. We really want to represent the people, and the only way we can do that is to really understand if there's something that's troubling you or you want changes, just to reach out to us.
Welcome to Herrimanology,
the official podcast to keep up with Herriman City.
We'll take you inside the city, explore the latest news and updates, show you how your government operates, and discuss the issues that affect us all. Now, here are your hosts talking all things Herriman on Herrimanology.
All right, welcome to Herrimanology. It is Thursday, February 13th, and a couple weeks ago, we talked about a National Weather Service report that said it was going to snow that weekend, and it kind of didn't. A rare miss by our meteorological friends. This weekend, there was another forecast for a winter weather event, and it came.
It's happening.
Good heavens, it is snowing quite a bit. So shout out to all of our snow, we call them snow fighters, plow drivers, and four-wheeler drivers and truck drivers that push the snow, try to keep up with it. You mentioned last night, too, at the council meeting about the forward-thinking and budget-friendly thinking of salt brine, something the city started doing several years ago now, that helps keep our roads in a better spot.
Yeah, and it was really driven by staff, by employees here that, looked into the idea and really created the facility to make it happen. So good job to all these people who work really hard for us.
Yeah, so drive safely, slow down as always. This is the first big snowstorm we've had, so good. It's nice for the water. Yep. So that's good. I'm John LaFollette, Communications Manager, joined today by Councilmember Herrimanology Ohrn from District 3. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Tomorrow's Valentine's Day. I wore my red.
There you go.
So you knew it. Don't forget.
Do not forget, indeed. Last night was a city council meeting. We'll go through some of the discussion items from the work meeting and the general meeting. Maybe we'll just go in chronological order. So one of the first discussion items was a monthly item that comes up. We call it the city status report. Kind of a snapshot at demographics and a business count and maybe new homes, things like that. What were your thoughts on that? And especially with this being kind of a new year, we talked about kind of an annual snapshot of 2024. What went through your mind during that?
Yeah, first of all, a big shout out to our commercial development team, our economic development. They're doing a great job. We're seeing quite a few more businesses pop up in Herriman, which is really essential to our sales tax base. We need to keep growing that. And we're also seeing our permits kind of level off and decline a little bit. Part of that has to do with the economy and the cost of building and things like that right now, interest rates and things like that. But it'll also tend to continue that trend over time because we're running out of land and raw land, and it's not as easy to build. Good flat land has gone away, and so it becomes more and more expensive to develop and build. So we're just seeing the change in that. It really kind of rolls over into some of the others, if it's okay. Some of the other things we talked about last night was looking at our general plan, just really understanding not our general plan but our budget over the next few years and how that lays over with our strategic plan. And we really have to understand the state of the city because it helps us get a good snapshot into which direction we're going. Are we seeing households increase, decrease? Just how many new businesses are we getting? Those types of things help us understand. We have different ways that we pay for things in the city with sales tax. We have point of sale, and then we have sales tax we get for a number of residents. And as we see it level off and not these big increases in numbers of residents, we have to recapture that sales tax with point of sale. So we have to be looking at economic development, those types of things, so that we can really make sure that we stay strong and can really cover the costs of our city.
We say this every so often, but if you live on one side of the city and don't often venture to the other side, you might be surprised driving around just what's there and new businesses that have come in. Something that we hear about a lot is, when is X business going to come in? And the answer is probably eventually. There are some businesses that are planning on coming in this year and some that came in last year. It's always growing, and we'd encourage you to drive out and go to a part of the city you haven't been in a while, because that sales tax is really important to the city. The cities in Utah especially lean pretty heavily on sales tax. And if you shop inside Harriman boundaries, then a portion of that goes back to your city to provide those services.
Yeah, we talk about that even like, not to name businesses, but the Smiths in Harriman and the one that's just across the street. So if you're going to go to that particular marketplace, please go to the one that's in Harriman, because that we recapture those sales tax revenues for our city.
And then later in that same work meeting, actually the second work meeting toward the end of the night, a legislative session update. This happens every city council meeting during the state legislative session. What are some of the things on your radar, the city's radar, that we're talking about with the legislative session?
Sure. I would just say just the overall picture is every year we're seeing legislation that's intended to address some of the affordability issues we have with our housing market. I know as a city and towns, from the league perspective, we've been trying to push back with the legislature and ask them to please halt on making any more changes to address that, because we really haven't taken the time to really understand if the legislation that's already been passed has had an effect. I can tell you that if I pull up the listings right now, it hasn't had an effect. So we really would like them to slow that down and take a pause on that for a little while. So a lot of the lobbying that's going on is really asking them to let's stop making a bunch more changes, because the changes have such big ripple effects that they may or might not even understand that they impact the city. And some of the things that are decided there have mandates we must do that cost us a lot of money, but they're not funded mandates. We just have to figure out how to generate more sales tax to cover those kinds of things. And at some point, it becomes really impossible to do. So those types of things, just really trying to make sure that they're not negatively impacting our city.
Yeah, there's a lot of legislation that's being proposed and voted on and talked about, and some of it gets passed. It may be safe to say that there's something that everybody will be affected by something in the legislative session, whether it's a tax rate change or a housing affordability thing that cities deal with a lot, or law enforcement, or water conservation and turf, things like that. There's something that's going to affect everybody. So it's a lot to follow, but encourage you to pay attention. And if you want to go follow different topics, you can go to their website, le.utah.gov, and you can see bills broken down by category or by legislator, or a lot of different ways. And it moves fast, but it's important. Super
important. I know we focus a lot. Sometimes I watch on social media and stuff. People focus a lot on what's going on in D.C. and we don't pay any attention on what's going on at the Capitol up in Salt Lake City. And for instance, there's a bill right now. It's a very large bill, over 7,000 lines in this bill, and it's a housing bill. But one of the components in there is about landscaping and front yard landscaping, those types of things, and it would take away our ability to require that in order for them to occupy their home. And the problem with that is a lot of our efficiency standards, our water efficiency standards, are based on those kind of mandates that you have to put in this type of landscaping. And so if that goes away, then so much of our effort on water conservation goes away. And those are just some of the ripple effects I'm trying to say. Sometimes we get too focused on, we have to solve this problem, and we forget the really big implications it can have if you widen your screen.
Yeah. And I'll say one more thing with this too. This applies with the state or the county or the city. If you have an opinion, if you have a thought, or if you have a suggestion, email and phone call is a lot more productive than a social media comment.
So much more.
Coming from someone who does a lot with social media from the city side, giving your thoughts, especially if they're just complaints on social media, that doesn't go quite as far as a productive conversation with a council member or with your local legislator, or what have you. And our city council has been really receptive to residents. Your voice is heard, whether it's a community meeting or an email or a phone call, which I think is appreciated by residents. It's easy to think that government doesn't listen, but at least Harriman City government listens, and it's important to reach out through the best channels.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for bringing that up. That's the most important thing, proper channels, because quite frankly, my algorithm on social media, I'm sure, is pretty messed up, because I don't really ever get on there very much, and when I do, it's just a bunch of ads, so those types of things. So I probably don't I probably am never even seeing or reading your information. So the proper way is just to reach out. You can always get our information on our website. My phone number's on there, email's on there. We really want to represent the people. And the only way we can do that is to really understand if there's something that's troubling you or you want changes, just to reach out to us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's move on to recapping the general meeting. If you remember, we've talked about a few times before a consent agenda, which is basically a list of things that need the city council's consent, but that aren't going to be up for discussion. Usually they're, I don't want to say formalities, that might be too informal of a word, but things that need to be formally approved, and the city council has the information, but they're just not worth or already have been discussed in the past. Anyway, one of those items last night was the 2025 firework restriction map. This is something I think a lot of people might be interested in. We'll talk about firework safety more as we get a little bit closer to the summer, but just important to know that was approved last night. You can find it on our website.
Yeah, I think it's really important to go on there. I know one of the things to really take note on there is just because your home or your property sits within the boundaries of its legal, if you're within 200 feet of an open field, it's not legal. So just be aware of those types of things. We just want to make sure we get through the holiday seasons, the fireworks seasons, and have fun with it, but also be safe.
Yeah. A discussion that did happen, actually went on for a while, was about impact fees. The item specifically was about one business. We won't get into that, but did want to explain just kind of the overall concept of impact fees. There are a lot of ways that governments can get revenue to be able to pay for infrastructure or services. Maybe if you wouldn't mind describing what impact fees are and kind of how they related to last night.
It's a tool, basically, of ways that we can pay for infrastructure. One of the impact fees we were primarily discussing last night was transportation impact fee. And so it looks at it and says, okay, if you bring that house or you bring that development in here, how will that impact the roads that are here? What do we have to do to improve the roads to absorb the impact that you're going to create, so that new growth is helping to pay for the impact that it has on your city? The problem is they usually don't really cover all the costs. There's typically a shortfall on them, but they're very restricted at the state. So you have to have a study that goes along with your impact fee. So you can't just randomly decide we want to charge this amount. You have to have a formal study that shows you what it is. When you receive those monies, they're in a fund that can only be spent on that. So they're very controlled funds, which is good and appropriate. But you do have to update those every time you have a change in your city. So there's been some tools added to the toolbox, PIDs, and a bunch of different ways that development can pay for infrastructure within their development. And so impact fees are simply a tool. And we've had some changes in our city with development approvals, and then these PIDs I talked about, paying for different types of infrastructure. So we are in the process of going back and updating our studies so that we can make sure our impact fees stay in line with where they should be, so that we're not overcharging for people that want to come into our city, but we're not undercharging and making the liability lay on the current taxpayers.
Yeah. And speaking of funding and finances, there was an update to the city's procurement policy. That's a tricky word, it turns out. So we've had a policy. It's needed updated, and city staff members and city leadership have worked for the last couple of years really to clean this up and to more solidify it, and it reached a finish line last night.
Yeah, it's been a while, and I can tell you sometimes this would be the opposite of the way I typically like it to go. We went from a page and a half to 20 plus pages, and I don't like that as a general rule. I like to shrink bureaucracy,
sure, yeah,
rather than grow it. But this is a good policy and much needed change, because the procurement policy, that difficult word, is intended to really be a safeguard to the public funds, to make sure that we're not having buddies that get all the contracts because they're our buddy, those types of things that can really lead to fraud and misuse of public funds. So this has been a really well thought out, vetted process that we have now a very detailed procurement plan to really safeguard the public funds.
Yeah, and there are a lot of contracts and invoices that go through the city in a given year, and some pretty high value ones, especially with road projects or water projects, things like that are incredibly expensive. And this helps make sure that the city's funds are, like you said, safeguarded, no matter the price tag, and make sure that multiple sets of eyes see different bidding processes and make sure that the public dollar is getting maximized.
Yeah, I like it. I think it really safeguards the taxpayer, and it really safeguards the city employees, because there's no way that you can get into a situation where people can point fingers at you and say you're misusing this, as long as you're following that process.
Yeah. So if you want to go catch any of that city council meeting, it's available as always on YouTube, or I would say Facebook Live. We actually had technical issues. It was not on Facebook Live, but we did post links to it on Facebook. In either case, you can go find it there, or links to it on Herriman.gov. So thank you, Councilmember Ohrn, for joining today. Thank you for listening and watching. Do not forget Valentine's Day. Stay safe in the snow, and we'll catch you next time.